Hi guys, welcome back to Chess Trainer. The day has finally arrived. Today we're going to play against the Caro-Kann, so for the chess opening in 10-minute series, we'll try to beat the most annoying opening of all, the Caro-Kann. As you know, I'm not a big fan of the Caro-Kann, but there's a good reason for that. The reason is that, in my opinion, White really has so many moves to get a good game even without knowing much theory. And in fact, today, in just 10 minutes, I'll show you an idea that basically gives White an excellent position without needing to know anything special. So these 10 minutes and a bit of further study are all you need. And the variation I'm going to show you is the exchange variation. But be careful, don't be fooled. The term exchange variation is usually used for those boring lines like the exchange French. Here it's anything but boring. This is a very aggressive and quite dynamic variation, specifically played to checkmate your opponent, so it's definitely not bad at all. Actually, this particular position, this unique pawn structure, is a completely reversed one, offering a fascinating and challenging strategic landscape. What does that mean? It means that usually this position is reached with black against the queen's gambit. However, here, since we're playing as white, we basically have that extra tempo, which allows us to achieve things we normally can't in the traditional queen's gambit, and that means creating an attack. Let me show you some of the opportunities. Here we start with bishop to d3. Why do we start with this move? We're playing against the bishop on c8. This bishop, usually in the queen's gambit, as I mentioned earlier, can easily develop to these squares. Here, however, it will really struggle, and that's quite a significant advantage. Black develops the knight, and we defend the center. At this point, after knight to f6, we manage to make another move that, in theory, you can't usually play in the queen's gambit. That is bishop to f4. So this is our structure, our basic setup, and as you can see, it doesn't really have much to do with the queen's gambit, precisely because we're able to make these extra moves that we can't play there, and so here we're in a very good position. The only alternative we'll look at here is the move queen to c7. Obviously, this is a clever alternative that tries to prevent the move bishop to f4, but you'll see that it won't be a problem. Anyway, let's start with the move knight to f6, which is the main line. We play bishop to f4, and at this point black plays bishop to g4, so they're trying to develop this bishop. We don't want to create weaknesses for ourselves with f3, also because we generally want to place the knight on f3, so here we make this move, queen to b3. The idea behind queen to b3 is to gain a tempo by attacking the pawn on b7, which black has to defend, and then as you'll see in the future, this queen will want to reposition itself by returning to c2, so it won't stay on b3 for long. In any case, what we want to do is take advantage of the bishop's position on g4. How do I take advantage of the bishop's position on g4? By playing knight to f3 and then knight to e5 in the future. Obviously, for now, we can't do that because if we play knight to f3, the bishop will capture it and ruin our pawn structure. So what move do we make first? Knight to d2. So we want to play knight to f3, having the option to recapture with the knight. Black correctly plays e6, trying to develop the bishop, and at this point we play knight to f3. The game I'm about to show you is very instructive and very beautiful. It was played between two great Chinese masters, so we're talking about a game played at the highest level. Here, black rightly decides to make the main move, which is bishop takes f3. Why does black make this concession? Because obviously white is planning to play the move knight to e5 in the future, which basically puts pressure on the bishop and moreover is quite dangerous. Let me give you an example. Let's say black moves the bishop to avoid, knight to e5 coming with tempo. Anyway, I play knight to e5 all the same, and here black can never capture this knight because after pawn takes, I now attack the knight. Let's say the knight moves away, and then it would seem that bishop to b5 wins the game on the spot, right? And so this knight to e5 is very annoying. For this reason, black often accepts this concession by playing bishop takes f3. Knight takes f3, but still, black says, alright, I made this concession, but I take away your bishop pair and play bishop to d6. For us, that's not a problem. We give back the bishop pair and castle. Black will do the same, and now our attacking plan begins. Obviously, our advantage is the space advantage, this open file, so we make use of it. We bring the rook to e1. You see, I'm not in a hurry now to play knight to e5. Maybe knight to e5 could be an interesting move, but we'll work on it a bit first. Knight to d7 is not just a move to prevent knight to e5, but also a move to possibly reposition the knight. So we start with our plan. Rook to e3. So you're starting to see the rook moves up to the third rank to create attacks. So it goes to these files to attack the opponent's king. Obviously, the queen will easily come back into play via c2 or in any case via d1 and maybe later h5. Here black played rook to e8, and so white didn't rush, played rook to e1, another improving move that makes sense. Knight to f8. Black realizes that some piece needs to stay to defend this king, and queen to d1. As I mentioned earlier, the queen did her job on b3, that is, she got out of the bishop's pin and made black waste a tempo by playing queen to d7. However, as I said at the beginning, b3 is not the best square for the queen, it's not her ideal spot. So, at a certain point, after we've perhaps arranged our pieces, the queen feels the need to return to her original square so she can reposition herself and maybe launch an attack. A move that, in short, tries to maybe bring the rooks over, or in any case, starts to support the castling. Now white goes for it and plays knight to h4 with the idea of bringing the rooks into attack and of course also targeting the queen. Black here wasn't very precise because he played queen to f4. In reality, okay, there is a threat. For example, if I play, I don't know, rook to c8, let's say this threat starts to be in the air, not immediately because obviously right now the knight is defending the rook. But for example, maybe I can start to create some threats against this knight and then go for these tactics. So black makes this choice and immediately plays queen to f4. In my opinion, it's not a precise move, but still, as I said, black was a GM, so he certainly wasn't a weak player. He must have had his reasons after all. But anyway, white doesn't hesitate and plays knight to f5. Obviously, now the pawn is pinned because I would capture the rook, so black moves the rook to rook f3, the queen moves away, and at this point, knight to g3. It might seem like little has changed, but in reality, with these two moves, white has improved his pieces. g6, and at this point, white decides to bring the queen into play in this way. Another potential threat here could obviously have been the move knight to h5, right? So the knight comes into play, then the rook might start causing trouble on g7, with the queen able to intervene whenever she wants. So black played this g6, but still queen to d2, and here black makes a mistake by playing e5. I often talk to you about dynamism, and I tell you that when our opponent is more dynamic than we are, it's unlikely that aggressive moves will work. Here, white is much more dynamic than black, so this e5 wasn't a good idea. And in fact, white immediately plays queen to h6 and black plays e4, so queen to h6 is strange because black manages to create a fork. But white had this beautiful plan in mind. Bishop takes e4, d takes e4, knight takes e4, and after rook to e7, knight to f6 check. Now the king has to go to h8, and we're just one move away from delivering mate. What do I mean by that? If the rook manages to reach the h3 square, the queen can sacrifice itself on h7, or even on f8 actually. And then the rook comes in with mate, so we're setting up this spectacular checkmate. But at this point, there's still the problem of the rook, which white solves like this: rook to e3, with the idea that after rook takes e3, f takes e3, now the rook is free to go, it's free to go. So quite rightly, black plays queen to e7, obviously with the idea that if rook to h3, I take the knight. And then white, without fear, plays g4 and closes out this game, because basically on the next move I'll play g5, and after that rook to h3, and I'll deliver mate. And essentially, black has nothing to stop all this, because the knight can't be moved. If you move another piece, g5 comes. And then let's say there's nothing that can save this position, because now rook to h3 is coming. I'll just show you. Let's make a random move. Obviously black has resigned, but I'll show you concretely. The idea is rook to h3, and at this point there's nothing that can stop queen takes h7 and rook takes h7 with mate. The only thing, of course, is to sacrifice the queen, but obviously we're talking about two grandmasters here. The black player resigned because he doesn't want to keep playing a game a queen down, especially since, in reality, mate still comes on g7 anyway. So, the idea behind this variation, the reason it's played, now we'll also look at the other one where knight to f6 is played, which allows bishop to f4, is exactly this. We castle calmly, and then we use the open file to bring the rook into play, and possibly use the e5 square to bring in a knight. But we also need to look at this other variation, which is also very interesting, queen to c7, which prevents us from playing bishop to f4. Obviously, we're stubborn, so we want to play bishop to f4 anyway, and we play knight to e2 with the idea of playing bishop to f4. Black doesn't wait around and plays bishop to g4, trying to pin our knight, because otherwise we would play bishop to f4 and be happy. At this point, we castle, black develops their pieces, and our idea in this position is this move, queen to e1, a very nice move that threatens f3, followed by bringing the queen into play. Black plays e6, we play bishop to g5, and we're setting up a very, very beautiful trap. Bishop to d6 is a natural move for black, who obviously goes after the h2 pawn for free. And here we have our beautiful trap. The trap is f3. Black might be tempted by the possibility of playing bishop takes h2 with check. Oh no, we've lost a pawn. But actually, after king to h1, we're attacking the bishop. After bishop to h5, the tactic is this. Bishop takes f6, pawn takes f6, queen to h4, and this is nothing more than a very simple double attack with which white obviously wins a piece. Believe it or not, I've managed to pull off this attack even at the Master Championship, so let's just say more opponents fall for it than you might think. And so for this very reason, let's say bishop takes h2 can't be played, and at this point black has nothing better than playing bishop to h5. But as you've surely understood by now, the queen can now develop to h4, creating further threats. Obviously threatening bishop takes f6, and then black's bishop is hanging, and on top of all this, I'm also defending, let's say the castling position. For these reasons we've just seen, here the main move is not bishop to d6, but rather bishop to e2, so black knowingly gives up the bishop pair just to avoid all these tricks. After taking on e2, bishop to d6, now we can play h3 or g3 without any problems. I suggest you play h3 so we avoid creating any more weaknesses. And here generally what's the issue? If black castles long, obviously he puts himself under the fire of white's attack. If black castles short, mate, the problem is that generally white has a comfortable position because he has the bishop pair, and now I'll simply develop the knight with knight to d2, knight to f3, and then maybe try to put it on e5. Of course, always bringing out the pieces first. White has a very comfortable position, so as you've seen, this is a very simple resource to play against the Caro-Kann, really with just 10 minutes of theory, and still get decent positions while taking very, very little risk. This is one of the reasons why I don't really like the Caro-Kann, because it gives our opponents so many opportunities. Again, not just this one, but this is the one I found easiest to explain to you in 10 minutes. It gives a lot of chances to get good play, and let's say I don't like giving my opponent good play for free. So I hope that with today's lesson, you can use this idea to beat those pesky Caro-Kann players. Let's spread the word, let's try to go against the Caro-Kann, and that's it. I'll see you in the next videos.